So the focus of this lecture is going to be on the two presidents, how they responded to the Great Depression, but mostly the New Deal, which that is going to be what the state standard mostly is. So this roughly covers in the textbook, I'm kind of going by a little, using a textbook, 6.3 and 6.4. You're reading 6.2, and that's going to help you kind of frame all this. So we're going to look at Hoover and what he thought about the Great Depression, and then we're going to look at FDR and his approach and just how they're similar and how they're different. So the vocab, the important vocab you have to understand. Volunteerism is first. This is going to be the idea that you use volunteers or community involvement to address the Great Depression instead of the government. So it is people doing it on their own initiative. Public works just means anything that the government builds. It can be dams, bridges, bridges, power lines, roads, walls, anything like that, buildings, anything. And then lastly, the New Deal, that's going to be the name of FDR's plan to address the actual Great Depression. So Herbert Hoover, we talked about him a little bit. He is the president at the beginning of the Great Depression, and he believed simply that the Great Depression would pass. If you remember back to our other lessons, the U.S. business cycle always went up and down, up and down, up and down. The economy always grew and then to shrink, grow, shrink. So he thought this is a normal thing. It's just a little worse. It'll pass. What he believes in are these two ideas of rugged individualism and volunteerism especially. So he thinks that the American people need to focus on kind of getting through it and use like grit. So he does not want government aid. No government aid. The government is not going to give money out to people. That is the state's jobs if they want to, or your local community. He wants charity to be the main focus. He really wants to focus on charity and that volunteerism piece. And then the last thing, and probably one of the most important to understand him, is what we call localism. Localism is the idea that the state and the local governments are the ones that are responsible, not the federal government. So remember, we have our three levels of government. We have federal, which is the U.S. government. We have state, which is obviously your state. And we have local, which is your community. He says the federal government is not for this kind of thing. It's not for individual aid. It's to take care of the country as a whole. Now, as you can probably guess, this is not super popular with the American people. He kind of makes it so people see him as the bad guy in this, when really this is the kind of the old way that a lot of people viewed the U.S. government. But we're going to see that FDR kind of has a new idea. So you can see here, this was kind of just how the Depression was going. You have bread lines everywhere. This is probably the most famous picture because if you look, it says the world's highest standard of living. Bread lines everywhere. Towns were telling people to move on. The idea of volunteerism kind of broke down. Nobody had money, so nobody could help anybody else, which made it so the Great Depression got worse and worse and worse. And what we see, the American people begin looking for someone to help them. They want the government to help them. So the way that Hoover addresses the economy is what we call supply-side economics. This is kind of a simple theory, okay? It's the idea that you have a pyramid, that's a square. It's the idea that you have a pyramid with money. And this is supposed to represent the economy. And what is going to happen in supply side, money is going to be put into the top of the pyramid. These are the people who own corporations. These are the big companies. And the idea is the money will filter down through the pyramid to the employees as the company pays its salary, expands its operations, and the economy restart. This is done through what's called the RFC, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. This was started by Hoover. It's a corporation the government owns, and the idea is it would give tax breaks and loans out to corporations with the idea, again, that those loans would go into the top of the pyramid, and then they would filter down to the workers through salaries. It didn't work because the companies used it to keep the company afloat. They didn't expand their workers. They didn't hire people back, they used it to keep the company going instead. So the money never made it to the bottom of the pyramid. Instead, what Hoover decides to switch to is what we call public works. This is going to be FDR's thing that really gets big. This is where the government would fund projects across the country. Things like Hoover Dam provides a lot of jobs. A lot of guys are working on Hoover Dam. They get paid. They're able to go spend that money, and the economy restarts. So Hoover kind of has to switch from the idea of supply-side economics, trying to get the economy started through the corporations, to public works, the government being the one that's going to restart the economy. So here's how supply side works. You can pause it on this, okay? But this is kind of the idea again. Money goes into the businesses at the top. This allows them to invest in their business. This creates new jobs. This allows people to go out and spend their money, restarts the economy. Hoover Dam was one of the projects, obviously, that Hoover funded, because Hoover Dam, a lot of jobs through this, a lot of guys that have jobs. But this is different from his original idea. The government is directly funding this investment. The government is the one that is spending the money. So we already went over the bonus army. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. This is just kind of what I'm going to tell you. This is the end of Hoover's political career. Because of how the bonus army was handled, Hoover absolutely is just kind of vilified by the American public, and it's the end of his career. So we get to one of the very important elections in the United States, and that is the election of 1932. We have two primary people running. We have Franklin Delano Roosevelt for the Democrats, and again we have Herbert Hoover for the Republicans. Roosevelt comes out and presents a New Deal to the American people. That's his idea. What he wants is he wants more direct government aid. He wants the government more involved in the economy, more involved in helping people. Herbert Hoover kind of wants to continue the same thing. This does not go over well, obviously, and FDR wins in an absolute landslide. He takes pretty much every state in the Union, and Herbert Hoover is defeated, and a new president obviously is elected. If we see here, look at the different, how they're presenting their ideas, all right? The man with the heart. Roosevelt is saying he's going to use the government to assist the American people. Hoover's saying he's not going to do that. Obviously, Roosevelt wins. So, President Roosevelt. The things to remember about him, first and foremost, Roosevelt believes in direct aid from the government. He wants the government involved in helping people during the Great Depression. That's a very popular message. He wants to kind of take some of the burden off the American people. He also wants to do what's called restoring confidence. He wants the American people to feel confident in the economy again, because he knows if they don't feel confident in the economy, they won't start spending money, and it will never end. So when you are studying the Great Depression and you go and you look at all these different programs, you have to think, is it a relief, recovery, or reform program? Relief means it's treating the symptoms. It's giving people aid. It's providing food. It's helping with debt. Recovery means it's helping the economy get running again. It's helping corporations get back on their feet. It's helping farmers get their prices for their crops up. It's putting in some kind of new improvement to help, shipping across the country. Reform, the last one, are reforms that make it so a Great Depression won't happen again. Sometimes the programs can be 2 out of the 3, sometimes they're 1, sometimes they're all 3 at once. That is more for you to make that judgment. So the way that FDR will do this and communicate to people is what we call fireside chats. And we're going to actually go over his fireside chats. But we're going to see that he communicates his ideas. He's really good at using the radio back then to tell people what he wants to do and how he's going to do it. So now we go into the actual programs. We're going to go through some of the programs. I am going to use the rectangle tool to put a rectangle around each one and show you what they are and explain them. You're going to kind of come up, are they relief, recovery, or reform? So the first thing was what we call an emergency banking bill. What this does, it closed all the banks for 4 days. This idea was to stop the panic of the bank runs, make people think about pulling out all their money. They start to see that their money's not going to disappear if they don't take it all out. And it works. People begin returning money to the banks. This allows the banks to start loaning out money. This allows the financial system to start working again. The next piece is the FDIC, which is still a thing today. This is a corporation, again, created by the government. And what it does is it insures your bank account. So originally it was $5,000. I think it's up to like $250,000 now. Oh yeah, right down here. $250,000. So if a bank run happens and you lose all your money in the bank, you fill out a form, you send it to the FDIC, and then they reimburse you for everything that you lost. That way, you feel confident that the money's in the bank. The next is the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. This regulates the stock market. It stops those like bad buying on margin practices. It stops inside trading. So it makes it so there won't be another stock market crash, because that was what really started this whole thing. The goal of this was to restore confidence in America's economy, and it kind of works. People start investing again. People start putting their money in the banks, but obviously it's going to be a long way to go until the Great Depression is fully fixed. Next, FDR addresses farmers. He tries to address the issues farmers have. So the AAA, this is one of his more controversial ones, the Agricultural Adjustment Administration. His goal is to end the overproduction. Now you think with people not having enough money for food, you'd want food to get cheaper. The issue, though, was that farmers in the United States were producing so much food that they couldn't afford to sell it. If it cost them $10 to ship their apples on the railroad and then $5 to get it to the train station, but they were only going to make $3 off the apples, it wasn't worth it for them to ship it. So there wasn't enough food in the cities, but there was lots of food in the countryside. So what this actually did, and it kind of sounds crazy, the government actually paid farmers to burn their crops and kill their livestock. That way there is less food available, the price of food rises, farmers are able to afford to send their food into the cities, and it drops the price of food overall in the cities. It helps farmers have more money, and it can help restart the economy. It kind of works. By the 30s, farm prices start to rise. Next is the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority. This whole thing was to build dams in the Tennessee River Valley, which is Appalachia. It's one of the poorest areas of the country. And this did two things. One, it provides jobs for people. People can go and they can get a job at the TVA if they're out of work, and then it can give them money and it can restart the economy. And it allows for electric power. It allows for flood control. That's something the country needed. The issue with this is that some people said that FDR was a socialist. He was using the government to do things that private industry could do. But these are like the public works stuff. This is what people wanted. They wanted the aid from the government. They wanted help from the government to try and fix the problems of the Great Depression. So jobs were the big thing, giving people jobs. And what FDR is going to do to give jobs is he's going to use the government. So the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, its only goal was to give jobs to people. Find things that the country needed and do them, or just find random things and do them. It employed about 2 million men, and they just built public parks, they planted trees, they restored streams, they cleaned up pollution, and it really wasn't for the benefit of all that stuff. It was to give those guys jobs so they could go out and spend money so they could restart the economy. The Works Progress Administration, the WPA, again, it was to provide jobs. It built public works like roads, electric lines, dams, bridges, government buildings. But it also hired different types of people like writers, artists, actors, photographers. They made these posters. They went and took these pictures because the idea was they're selling this to the American people as well. They're showing how good it's doing, but also it gave those people jobs. They could go out, they could spend money, and they could restart the economy. So you just see this is some artwork and posters and stuff from the WPA. They would just pay them to do this so they could have money, but also to kind of restore confidence in the nation. Industry was a big thing. So like this is dealing with the factories. This is dealing with the businesses, not as much individual people. NIRA, the National Industrial Recovery Act, what this did is it set up competition codes so that industries wouldn't try and put each other out of business and tried to make it fair. This would allow more corporations to stay in business. They could pay their workers, those workers who got to spend their money, restart the economy. The National Recovery Administration, NRA, regulated production and wages. It was kind of like a voluntary society you could join as a business owner or a industrialist, and there were certain things you had to do. You had to regulate your production, you had to have a certain wage, you had to keep prices low, and if you did that, you got what is over here called the Blue Eagle stamp, and it was kind of a way to like bring the country together. Like I'm doing, if you read it, it says I'm doing my part to help the country. And again, it kind of sells the New Deal to the American people. Last one is the Public Works Administration, the PWA. Again, it's a Public Works Administration. It deals with corporations so that they'll build bridges, dams, power plants, government buildings, gives people jobs, restarts the economy. So you can kind of see a common thing. Give people jobs, restart the economy. That was the first New Deal. The second New Deal is during Roosevelt's second term. So Roosevelt gets reelected. He's very popular. The American people absolutely love him. So he gets reelected, and he decides to expand the New Deal. If you look at this cartoon, though, there's going to be some pushback. It's like Uncle Sam, America is sick, and FDR is the doctor. And all these pill bottles are the different programs that FDR set up. And it's like Uncle Sam is getting too much. So people start to kind of push back on it. This is going to be the second New Deal is going to focus more on the, and this is the key part, the long-lasting reforms. The things that FDR thinks will make the American economy run better and make a second Great Depression not happen. The biggest one, and this is the one that's going to affect you the most in your life, is the Social Security Act. This is a pension system for old people. Before this, if you were old and you couldn't work, you relied on your children. You did not have a check that you got from the government. This sets up a pension system that you pay into with your taxes. So right now, if you're working, you're paying into it. And then when you retire, you get that money back and you are able to live on your own and you don't have to, live off your children or move in with somebody. It also sent things to people who are disabled on the job, mothers with children. It was set up as a safety net to help the American people. It's one of the biggest programs in the United States to this day. And we're going to be going over it a lot more because it is heavily in debt and is slowly running out of money. The Rural Electrification Act is a pretty easy one. Believe it or not, most rural areas in the country did not have electric power at this time period. When you think of it from an electric power company's point of view, I don't want to run power lines out to that little tiny town of 500 people. I'm never going to make any money back. I want to do all my power lines in the cities. What this did, it loaned electric utilities money so that they would build power lines, and it works. By the 50s, almost 80% of American farms finally have electricity. And it's crazy to think that in the 50s, there were still farms that didn't have electricity at this point. But this is, the government is now subsidizing different communities, all right? It's keeping them connected to the power grid. FDR also wants to see reforms happen with labor unions. He says if labor unions are strong, that's going to help the American worker. That's going to keep the American worker making money. That'll keep the economy going. So he gets the Wagner Act passed. This makes it so you are allowed to join a labor union. You cannot be fired if you're going to join a labor union. Your company can't just get rid of you if they hear you're organizing a union. The Fair Labor Standards Act, if you're working somewhere, you probably have this exact poster in your workplace, or you should, and it just finally sets up a code for minimum wage, child labor, max number of hours you can work before you get overtime. And it kind of, both of these protect workers. The idea is protecting workers will help the economy because then they'll be able to spend money and they'll be safer in their jobs. So you got to think of these two things, all right? How did the New Deal treat the symptoms of the Great Depression? So think of that relief and recovery, and then how did it look at the root causes of the Great Depression and try and do those reforms? So you should break everything up into relief, recovery, and reform and see if you can kind of apply those different programs. If you have any questions, let me know, and I'd be more than happy to help.